And hello. It's another fine day out here in the central Victorian goldfields. I'm speaking from here, from Bendigo in Victoria, Australia, here on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders of the past, present, and the future, and of the land, and also acknowledge their struggles against the same forces that we're up against. Well, we'll probably go for an hour again. I want to keep these pretty much around about an hour, a little bit, give or take a few minutes. First of all, just wanted to talk about, we just recently celebrated the 167th anniversary of the Red Ribbon Rebellion, which happened actually from the period of the 21st of August to the 27th of August in 1853 here on the Victorian goldfields. Now, for those of you who are interested in about this, I would strongly suggest to look at the Bendigo Trades Hall Facebook page. It's on there. We conducted a live video on last Thursday, and it's certainly some history there. I have to admit, I was at the end there. It was a last-minute ditch effort where I wound up reading the story, and certainly we had to wing it a little bit. There were some words there that we usually don't use now in this time and era, which they used in the mid-1800s. But certainly it was quite enjoyable doing that, and it's vitally important. We wanted to share this history because it was a very crucial part of our history of early labour struggles in this whole entire country and the state of Victoria. And it's worthwhile having a look at it. I think I want to just talk a little bit about the rebellion right through from the early 1850s right up to 1854, which culminated in Eureka. And on top of that too, Karl Marx wrote an article about the Eureka Stockade of 1854. I want to do some research on that later on and go have a look at his article. It'll be very interesting to hear what to say. But at that time, when around the early goldfields era, the early 1850s, it was the major gold rush. Gold was discovered. Obviously, there was a big influx of people from all over the world looking for their fortune here in Australia, or then known as various colonies. And it wasn't just Victoria; it was New South Wales. Obviously, I believe it was Queensland as well, and Tasmania to a certain degree. Western Australia later on had a gold rush in the later part of the 19th century, from late 1880s right through to early 1900s for that 1890 period. And I want to just give a big shout out to Dust. Welcome aboard, comrade. Great to have you on board. What was the rebellion about? It started off about a very harsh tax. It's not a matter that people didn't want to pay tax. That wasn't the issue, but it was how it was implemented in the first place. Now, I understand that Australia at the time, we were under various six colonial governments. Yes, six colonial governments. Parliaments were starting to form, but mind you, said the common people, from even up to small storekeepers, shopkeepers, could not vote. We didn't have a vote at all. Not unless the only people that voted were the top military brass, the squat top, what we call in Australia here, the squattocracy. They were the landed gentry, who basically the ones who drove to steal the lands of the indigenous people here and had large acreages and vested estates of mainly of growing sheep and also grains like barley and wheat, etc. And also the rich merchant traders at the time as well. As I said, we did not have a voice. And how they imposed that tax was they deemed, well, the real purpose was it because there was actually a chronic labour shortage. Everyone was leaving low-paying jobs, etc. For maybe if you were a simple shepherd, you might have been just a rural worker, worked on someone's land in estate, big estate there, fixing fences, whatever. But you could be even a bricklayer or a stonemason in one of the regional towns or cities. So you actually looking for gold was a very good fortune at the time and wanted to move ahead, which is desirable. We all wanted to seek some sort of comfort in life. Obviously, gold would have helped enrich our life in that way in a monetary sense, and certainly assist a long way. So that's not surprising. But there was a big influx into the central Victorian goldfields, and the governor at the time realised, well, in order to generate revenue, we'd impose a tax and decreed that all gold it belongs to the Crown, to Her Majesty at the time, Queen Victoria, etc. and they imposed a licensing fee. Now, if that was £3 at the time, £3 back then, it was quite a substantial lot of money. It wasn't, it's nothing now. It's probably, but back then was a substantial lot of money for anyone. And if you didn't find any gold, tough, you had to pay that. And especially when the immediate surface gold was a shortage after being extensively mined out. A lot of people that were digging around found it very hard. And the way it was implemented was through a very harsh, brutal regime. If you didn't have your paper license on you at the time to produce it, you were immediately arrested. You were dragged by horse, flogged, put in stocks and chains, beaten. You were actually left out in the sun, chained up, left out in the sun on a scorching summer, nearly at the point of perishing because of the heat, or in the middle of a freezing cold winter. It didn't matter. It was done corruptly as well. So not only they were looking at your license, a lot of people had to cough up extra money just to pay off the then colonial police, known as the trappers at the time. The police were actually originally formed to find escaped convicts, massacre Aborigines or Indigenous people. I do apologise, and look after license and chase people without license fees. And furthermore, also go hunting for apprentices who escape from their masters. That's exactly right. So that's what there you go. There's your early colonial police. Not there for law enforcement to protect you and I from crime. No. Or solve crimes, etc. No, that's what they were mainly there for. And a lot of them were from very dubious backgrounds. Some of them were actually ex-convicts themselves. Very, very dubious backgrounds as well. So just wanted to give you that sort of little bit an outline of how the rebellion came about. You can see the material conditions, things just got worse. Now, in 1851, there was the big monster meeting at Castlemaine, or it's actually south of Castlemaine, and a place now it's called Chewton, originally known as Chowtown, and named after the Chinese miners. And there was a big monster meeting of about 15,000, led to believe, and at the time of about not having to pay a tax. It was waived at the time, but it had been followed on 2 years later because things got a lot worse here, and which culminated in the Red Ribbon Rebellion here in Bendigo of 1853. Now, what made this very unique in Bendigo in the sense 40,000 people were prepared to fight. Yes, there was all the ammunition in the town was bought up. Though you couldn't find any lead anywhere because it was all melted down into musket balls at the time. And well, obviously, the governor of the colony at the time, Latrobe, had a problem on his hand, and they decreed that they waive it once again or even pay less tax as well, which was presented in a petition on the August 27th of 1853. And the organisers of that rebellion, we have to take our hats off. It didn't lead to bloodshed. It could have led to bloodshed. Fortunately, it didn't at that time, but unfortunately, it did the following year, 16 months later, on the 3rd of December, in Ballarat at the time, which is about an hour and 20-minute drive from here. And unfortunately, at that time, there was a new governor at the time, and he, obviously, the British authorities learnt their lesson. And, any imperial power, how they deal with things is not through reason, not through negotiation. They deal it with brute force, and that's what they did. They hit the miners during the early hours of a Sunday morning, and obviously where everyone had their guard down, and it resulted in massacre and major brutal repercussions afterwards. But on that, what came out of all this? Besides, it was the early labour movement that was developed for them. A lot of fine trade unionists came out from that struggle. Also, they started to actually form some basic rights that we should have been entitled. Because under that, guys, under the whole Red Ribbon Rebellion was no taxation without representation, similar to the American War of Independence, where it's a very similar thing. They were imposed with a tax without any say at all, and how it was implemented was really brutal. So it gives you a little gist of it. And at that time, I also recommend, if you can get your hands on this book, also there's this one here, Eureka and Beyond by Monty Miller. Monty Miller, or Montague Miller, is actually one of Australia's revolutionaries. And it is a rare book. I went to the Communist Party of Australia site to order it again because I don't know what I did with the other original copy. I think so I might have lent it to someone, and obviously went halfway over Australia, never to be seen again. So if you can get your hands on this, I'm not too sure if you might have to Google it. I would highly recommend it. It's actually good for those of you who are overseas to learn some of our early history, because a lot of people don't know. Sometimes when I watch Kayla Morpin's live chats, and excellent live chats as well, I see some comments sometimes about Australia, and people don't know, have a clue about our early history and our labour movement here, and just how rich it was. Certainly inspiring stuff, and there's some important lessons to be learned from this as well, what we can do today. Lesson number 1, the importance of organisation. And that's like my early videos I've talked about, why the importance for socialists and communists to be involved in trade unions. Regardless of how bad form they are, or poor form they are, well, that's what you think of their leaderships. You need to be involved. That's where you have a concentration on working class people. Fighting for maybe just some basic wages and conditions, they have to start somewhere. On top of that, through that, you can actually talk to workers about their job. If you want to raise class consciousness now, this is vitally important. This is what they did back then, raise class consciousness and the importance of organisation. And what they did was the old saying, educate, repeat that again, apologies, educate, agitate, and organise. That's what they did. This is what we need to get back to those basics principles again. And talk to working class people. We don't need to create anything new. None of this was something pure. Lenin warned that in the left-wing communism in Infantile Disorder. And those comrades who actually make remarks about unions, I can guarantee one thing. They've never been a working class struggle at all. They just sit back on the side, and that's got to stop. Once again, I said that last week. No more armchair activism. No more sitting behind keyboards. Get out there in the real world. I know we've got COVID-19 restrictions at the moment, so things are holding back, but we can do a lot of pre-prep stuff as well. What we need to be is involved in it again and talk to working class people. And once we have restrictions lifted, obviously, we can get out a lot more. It's just some simple stuff, even going in door knocking. Talk to working class people about their work. What do they do? What's it like at their work? And working from there. Don't sort of come in the high above and saying, well, from a higher level, because what I'm saying is, what I mean by that, if you're not going to address their concerns, well, you're actually walking up a dead end. Yes, you're walking up a dead end about that. So it's really important to see where they're at the time. And yes, you do need to talk to white Anglo workers as well. And I know what's going on in the US, and it's been terrible as well, the whole situation. But the working class is divided. It needs to be united. And one way you can get that back again is find out what they do for a living and start working from there and find out what their primary concerns are, which is usually economic. That's what it is. And unfortunately, a lot of working class people have moved to the looking at Trump, etc. in the US. Not so much Democrats, I don't think, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. The reason being, it's because Trump originally touched on their economic concerns. These are the people that saw their steel mills close down, their manufacturing go offshore, etc., etc. And all they saw was the end result of neoliberal politics, etc. over there. Drug abuse, destruction of their communities, breakdown of families, the whole structure, their social structure into disintegration, total destruction. What working class people want is a guaranteed source of income, security, stability. They're not asking for a massive mansion and several properties and go and play golf and fly around jets all over the world. No, they're not asking that. They just want a stable life. They're not actually a quiet life, to be honest with you. And that's what they want. They're not asking for any more. They're asking for any less. And that's a desire I think we all want. I'm a boilermaker by trade now and organised, but and I guarantee you now, in my life, that's all I want. Into my old life, I'm not going to live forever, yes, but reality is, I want a comfortable life as well. I don't want nothing more, nothing less. I'm not interested about owning businesses or owning several houses, etc. But unfortunately, working class people have been pushed into a situation, and when the left, and this is not just here in Australia, America, I see Canada, UK, abandoned the working class and came out with all these trendy issues, you've got a problem on it. And this is the problem. We've got a problem on our hand. This is the problem we have to deal with now. But we need to get back to that. Get out of the movement, get into the masses, get out of the masses. You know what I'm talking about. So that's what we need to. That's what we need to look back at again, and it's going to be hard work. It is hard work. I recommend though, one thing is to know some of the basics as well, full of both your economic and your philosophy, etc. But go in. But I highly recommend go out and do the door knocking. If you're by yourself at times, it can be a little bit more, but just start with those basic things. You don't have to argue with people. Some people wish to be argumentative with you, etc. Okay, fine. Look, you're not going to change everyone's opinions. That's not. But if we can start do those basics and start that basic organisation of bringing people together again, talking about their economic concerns, and we can move forward. Trade unions need to be part of that central structure of working class community again, and show that they are there to represent working class interests as well. Trade unions, a lot of them, yes, no, not revolutionary organisations. That a lot of them didn't. In Australia, actually, we adopted the British model. Well, that was a generic inheritance. 6 British colonies through the 1800s, and obviously we brought all those traditions out from the UK as well, from craft-based unions. Industrial unionism came in the 1880s for the formation of unskilled workers in what was known as the shearers and the miners' unions, etc. So that's where we've adopted. In the US is a little bit different, I understand, but it doesn't. What happens? I'll rephrase that. I was meant to say something else that went straight out of my head. We've got to look at what the material conditions at the time. It's going to determine how we're going to work and operate at the time. And I think, as I said, we've already got these organisations in place, and it's how we go about it. Another simple thing to do as well, especially when the restrictions do get lifted, I would suggest actually maybe spend $5, go a couple of dollars, get a cheap card table, a couple of cheap 2 or 3 chairs, and if you have got about another comrade, another 2 comrades, why don't you just organise a Saturday out at a shopping centre, set something up, a simple flyer, addressing people's concerns, obviously, and start there. Yeah, and also making flyers up in the letterbox as well. And that way, obviously, it's not just about talking at the time, that's the initial work, and maybe culminate then organise a public meeting, for example, through a community hall, or what we call a trades hall. We have a trades hall here, and if you're wondering what a trades hall is, it's a union hall. It was set up in the 1800s as well, actually from those Goldfield rebellions at the time. So that's something. It's just some simple stuff we need to get back to again. And look, Caleb's talked about it. Dust who's joined us today as well. He talks about that as well, the importance of it and the importance of struggle. And I want a big shout out to Comrade Helen as well. How are you going? I'll give you a call later on too. And that's why it's quite important. We need to get to do those basics again. We don't, as I said, we don't need to start something new. We don't need to create something new at all. We've got to find where the struggle's at, where the organisation's at. So, and the other thing too, community groups. Let's find out where certain community groups are. Well, obviously you're operating, and if you're living within your immediate area. And obviously there's some that coming to get together, and it's good to be engaged there as well. And it actually develops you further as well. That way you can actually articulate your arguments when you do have debates. You're actually engaging with everyday people that they're dealing with their own everyday issues and work from there. As I said, if you try and go up for a higher level, we all like to say we're anti-imperialist, we're this and that and everything else. A lot of that goes over a lot of working class people's head. Here in Australia, we're talking about being anti-imperialist. Well, guess what? 75% of the working class support the US-Australia military alliance. Yes, they do. And so it's a bit sobering, but where do we need to start from there? Do we come up high above and saying they're all wrong? Or do we start back again what their basic concerns are? That's where we need to look at it. And I've actually if you do recall, I think I might have started my first video or my second one. I talked about the higher levels of struggle, the economic, the political, and the ideological. Start with the lower first. That's where and then it develops up to higher levels of struggle. It's actually dialectical and historical materialism in practice, philosophy. And that's what you're seeing as well. Scientific socialism. It's not a dogma. It's not something that we just read once. It's a living science, and this is where you practice it. And if you don't practice it, well, you don't know where you're going to go wrong either. You need to learn. You're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. But the thing is, we don't make mistakes. And we can look back, what we did right, what we did wrong. Okay, where we go wrong, then we can work ourselves how we can go better about our work. But make sure one thing: if you ever feel like you're by yourself and that, communicate with other comrades. And some of you are isolated. I get that. I do get that. And I've lived in remote areas of Australia as well. And sometimes, if you want to feel isolated, live in a remote part of Australia at times. But look, I think it's vitally important you communicate, go for these YouTube channels, maybe even set up a simple Facebook group just to have those discussions, how to move forward. I think it's vitally important to do that and just realise, well, you're not alone. We have communication now. One thing about this whole COVID-19, it's forced us all to use this stuff. Before that, I'd never thought twice. Now I do Zoom in meetings, don't use Skype too much, and use these YouTube channels as well, YouTube videos. It's a great way to communicate. Well, just going back a little bit of early history, going further, I'll read a little extract out of Eureka and Beyond. Now, this was edited by Comrade Vic Williams, who passed away, I think, about 10 years ago. Now, he was in his 90s. He was a communist most of his life. He actually joined the original Communist Party in the 1930s. And he was a waterside worker, or wharfie, we call them here in Australia. In UK, and I believe in America, you call them dockside workers. Very active in his union right up to about the mid-70s. And him and both Vic and his wife, Joan Williams, or Justine, she's otherwise known, she was a brilliant author, wrote many books. They're both communists, and in the mid-70s, interesting, they went to go and live in the Soviet Union for about 18 months. Those who are probably closer to him might have known. But Vic played a very important role in my ideological understanding of the world, and he was really good. He was spot on many things. Prior to actually interesting, 2008, what commonly known as a global financial crisis. It wasn't a financial crisis, it was a crisis of overproduction. I remember taking some newspaper articles around his place, and this would have been about, say, 2006, 2007. And he'd look at it and he'd just laugh. He really thought it was hysterical stuff, the bourgeois press lights winning out. Because he saw it, he said, it's coming. And he could actually nearly put a right date when it all happened. So the stuff he saw what was happening with the economy at that time. And he even said, we will never, ever recover from this. And we haven't. Let's seriously look at Australia's never recovered from it completely. I loved how they put it all out there. Australia was immune. It's robust V8 economy. Well, we may have weathered some things, but not completely. And especially I've seen now in the US, it's never recovered from that at all. But I want to get back to having a little read of this. And I forgot my glasses, but I want to have a look at this. And obviously, there's just a little thing about law and order, reminiscences of an alleged criminal, written by Monty Miller at the time. And it goes, the subject of these memoirs was born on the planet Earth, on the eastern side of its southern hemisphere, in the year of our Lord, 1832, and during the reign of His Most Gracious and Excellent Majesty, King William IV. As these annals contain the many and strange experiences of the author under the boasted British justice of law and order, it is essential that the genesis of the autobiography should be, as above stated, in lawful and orderly form. My readers may wonder why, with such desire to make the statement of my birthplace in lawful and orderly form, I do not supply details as to country, city, town, village, or bush location with longitude and latitude. Of course, I might have given the place of my birth, the planet, as being in the solar system, in the universe, but there are quite sufficient reasons for not giving minor details. They are as follow. 1, there is but one world and one human race, all of whom are born in the same place, my birthplace, your birthplace, dear reader, and the common natal point in space of all our race. 2, this mental attitude on my part induced me as a comparatively early age to commence to wipe out all lines of caste, creed, colour, and the term nation, all of which are high fences and mean partition walls that must be broken down before concord and unity can be possible for mankind. 3, I fully endorse the sublime summary of Thomas Paine. The world is my country, mankind my brethren, and do good my religion. No one can adopt that cosmopolitan declaration while his mind harbours a preference for one country or nationality as superior to all others. Therefore, I declare myself a citizen of the world. Monty. That was written by someone who was born in 1834 in Tasmania, fought at Eureka Stockade. He passed away in 1920, in the years 88, and he is one of our revolutionaries, very known revolutionaries here in Australia. And that was someone written back then. But really, that was someone who might have touched on Karl Marx, but he wrote it himself. And it's interesting how material conditions, people come to their own conclusions at that time as well. So always keep that in mind. Material conditions will determine your people's ideas and consciousness at the time, and social being determines consciousness. So I want to read a little bit further, and it's obviously I want to look at the Eureka Oath and the Shaping of a Man. So I'm going to actually read up to We Go Digging, or read that part where we go digging. And he goes, we go digging. The art of government is to take a great amount of money from a great number of people and distribute it among a few, from Voltaire. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? As the Duck and Swan station of Booth and Argyll was only 25 miles from the gold diggings on the east side of the Great Dividing Range, it was one of the first to be deserted by its employees. And Mr. Booth said to me, well, Monty, my lad, they have all gone off to get tons of gold, though the sheep washing and shearing are coming on. We couldn't do anything. You had better go to the diggings and with the rest. With my spirit for change and adventure, I at once fell in with a suggestion. My good employer paid me what was coming to me, gave me an outfit from the store, plenty of rations, and told me I could always come back if I wanted to work again. So let me just get a sip of water first. Or with grim humour. In a week's you might want to buy the station and stock. He gave me a kindly goodbye, and Monty, stricken with good gold fever, was off to the diggings. I had 25 miles to go when I got to the diggings at Golden Point, Forest Creek. Forest Creek's actually near Castlemaine. Yeah, early next day, I had a look about me. I went to a tent where there was a woman, the only place where I saw a woman at the time. I said, if you please, ma'am, can I leave my swag here until I look around for my mates? She replied, certainly. If you put it inside our large tent, it will be all right. And I did. I might have left it anywhere. At the butt of a tree, it would have been all right. Property was safe. There was no crime. I saw one of the chaps who had been on the station, and I spoke to him. He was a bit surprised to see me. I told him Mr. Booth had told me that it was no use my stopping here, that I could not do the sheep washing and never did the shearing. Therefore, I had come there. He said, what are you doing? What are you going to do here? I said, there is only one thing to do here, go digging. He said, have you got a pick and shovel and a dish? I said, no, I have nothing. I'll have to get them. I suppose I can get them as others do. Oh, well, he said, come with me. I went, and four of them, three others, and this chap, who had come from the station, had a powwow together, and they agreed to take me in as a camp keeper and cook on a half share. Whatever gold they got, I was to have a share. If they got little, I got precious little. If they got anything decent, I got my share. Just interesting what he just said there was actually a form of collectivism. So everyone was in this together. There was a sort of level of trust as well. It wasn't over wages and conditions, obviously. What we traditionally know what collectivism is in trade unions. But it shows you how important working class people do get together, and they can have got the ability to look out for each other. And just some basic things, our common survival, clothing, food, shelter, and water, yes. And believe me, we're a communal animal. It just comes to show this is in practice, and those material conditions determined it. I'll continue. I said, that will suit me all right. I squared up the camp, made the beds, and put everything right. Prepared the midday meal, Irish stew, or something of that sort. Fried steaks, baked damper, and bread. If you're wondering what damper is, that's actually a mixture of flour and water, mostly, and I think they mixed something else in it. It's a basic form of bread. They used to cook it in a fire, etc. Many gold diggers on the Bendigo site were compelled to abandon the fields because of the diminishing yield of gold. The shallow workings being pretty well exhausted, and these men had gone out to try to get harvest work on the first farm started on the Loddon River. Wherever there was a bridge over the river was a favourite camping place, and after a while, when I went looking for harvest work, I camped under a log bridge with a great crowd of others. The crops were not ready for harvesting, and we were waiting for operations to commence. During the evenings, there was a general experience meeting in which the wayfarers recounted the times of their good fortune when a man could get 2 or 3 ounces of gold a day with a tin dish. Some record how they had nuggeted out a pound weight a day from rich surfacing claims. Also, how wildly and recklessly they had knocked down these gifts of fortune. One would tell how they'd gone over to old Sydney town and had a grand old spree there. Another one would boast similar reckless extravagance in Melbourne town. Some of them had stuck up along the road at the Sly Grog shanties, which abounded, and had never reached Melbourne at all, and had knocked down their hard-earned gold in wild sprees, and royally entertaining all hangers-on at the shanties. I had no experiences to recall, being the youngest in the crowd and rather diffident about speaking unless there was good occasion. But an old Murrumbidgee whaler, when they had pretty well given all their accounts, said to me, "Well, young fellow, my lad, you have been listening to all of these, I notice, and you have never had a chip in. Did you never get hold of a real good rise and have a razzle-dazzle with it?" Just remember, keep it in the language. I have a little laugh at some of the language they used at the time, but just keep in the context. This is circa early 1850s, so some of the language is pretty out there at times. I said, "No, I never succeeded in being one of the lucky ones. I never got a real golden hole at Sugar's shop. I've got no sprees to recall of my own, but I have not been noticing all that has been said here, and I have got my own view of things. I've been putting it together." Somebody said, "Why, strike me dead, young one. You don't mean to say as you are going to preach a sermon?" "Well, no," I said. "I'm not good at sermons. It is not a sermon. It is more like a song, perhaps." And the Murrumbidgee whaler, the man who first spoke to me, said, "By God, if it's a song and a good one, let us have it." I said, "Well, I am just finishing it up. I was sitting on my swag with a shovel between my legs, and the back of the shovel was my desk. I finished the last verse or two. I was always good at writing jingle, as my friends know, but never high-class poetry." I said, "Here you are. I'll let you have it for all it's worth. It is only what I think, and nobody need make any offence." The Murrumbidgee whaler said, "Bog on, young fellow, and if anyone takes offence, they can talk to me about it." I started and I read. They had cursed everybody for everything other than their own folly. I will not read the song. I will not sing the song, because I wish everyone to listen to this and watch this video. I'm not going to subject you to my singing or lack of it. But what's important, this was all the lead up to what culminated at Eureka in 1854. And there's a lot to read through this. And one time I will actually want to just only concentrate on more reading this, but we'll look at the important lessons at the time. I just wanted to actually some of that little character around Monty Miller. Now, as I said, he was born in 1834. Yes, and early life, his actually original first job ever, he was actually sold to someone in Sydney as an apprentice carpenter. Now, at that time, the apprenticeship scheme, usually all poor, very poor working class people had nothing. So the idea was to indenture your young son to a master for so many pounds. I think for maybe a pound or £2. And he was indentured basically in service to that master until such time he was released and became his trade. And it was a pretty brutal regime for apprentices. And he was treated pretty bad by his master at the time. Was actually called the master craftsman. If he made a mistake, he was usually beaten with a knotted rope. And pretty painful stuff at the time, and shocking stuff. The apprentice usually lived with the master's family, etc., all the other stuff as well. I mean, besides learning a trade, that's what it was. And when I do just start at the start of this live chat, what I mentioned is one of the early police we had known as trappers in New South Wales Rum Corps. One of their first duties was to hunt down escaped apprentices who were escaping the brutality of their masters. Well, why would you want to hang around getting flogged all the time and beaten to a pulp, etc., when there's much better life seeking elsewhere? Of course, I did the same. I escaped as well. And he did. He escaped Sydney town, went down a dirt track, was originally organised by the old Bullock teams, which now becomes today's modern Hume Freeway or Hume Highway, and made his way into Victoria, where he found work on the first of all, as a shepherd and a farmhand, and obviously when I just read that, when that introduction where he left the farm to move to the gold diggings of the 1850s, and that was around Forest Creek, which is south of here of Bendigo. It's in Castle Lane. He had to look for his fortune there as well. One day he eventually went over to the Ballarat gold diggings where there's further gold being found, and at that time that was during the rebellion against the gold tax. Well, it wasn't just any tax; it was a brutal regime imposed on everybody. And just to actually further on that tax as well, and if you didn't work on the goldfields, but you happened to be in any of those camps or towns of Bendigo and Ballarat, you could be a store owner or a shop owner. You can grow vegetables. Even the person who worked in a vegetable garden got a gold tax on them, and it was quite a substantial lot. So you can just imagine everyone was in a big uproar about that. This is where it culminated. Now, when it culminated in Eureka at Stockade, there was what we called known as the Ballarat Reform League, which happened in the later part of 1854, which culminated in the Eureka Rebellion, which actually started, funny enough, in late November of that year of 1854. People rose a flag, and it was very similar to this. You see on the front, it was one with a blue flag with a white cross with 5 stars on it. And actually, a lot of trade unions use it to this day. They swore their allegiance to the Southern Cross, and everyone around the globe was most welcome under that flag as well. So regardless of your race, your nationality, etc., you're all united under that banner. Now, on the 3rd of December 1854, after the diggers set up a proper stockade, obviously had the British authorities worried. The British colonial government sent a garrison out there to storm the stockade at the time, organised conjunctly with the local police, who were a bunch of crooks basically. And they actually, in the early hours of Sunday, the 3rd of December 1854, would have been about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And at that time, a lot of people were still quite religious, and they thought the day of the Sunday, that was a holy day. No one worked. Everyone just had to rest their garden. So it was lightly guarded. It was probably like that, probably 200 people in that stockade. If they were on high alert and everyone was there, the outcome would have been certainly different of that battle. But it wound up being a massacre of the diggers and a lot of arrests, etc. But after that, although it culminated in that bloodshed, it was a lot. Actually, right through the colonies of the Eastern Australia, there was major public uproar about it. And the British authorities at the time were actually very worried that this was going to turn into a war of independence. So it could have been our war of independence as well, under the guise of no taxation representation. They lost the American colonies of the 1700s. They didn't need this again. They needed to have the Australian colonies to protect all their trade with the East India Company, and then also their expeditions into China, etc. So they needed a base to protect it from, and an expanding market at the time. So they brutally crushed it, but it backfired magnificently because there was actually a lot of tension now on the New South Wales goldfields. The rebellion, the seeds of rebellion were spreading everywhere. So they had to do something about making massive compromises after that. They had a problem on their hand. They could either result in another war of independence, or they could give major concessions at the time, which they did. So this is vitally important, that through organisation and that you can achieve, sometimes through harsh circumstances, achieve some extraordinary things as well. From that, out of that period of the early 1850s, did you know in 1856, 2 years after Eureka, 21st of April 1856, the first 8-hour day. First 8-hour day was won by stonemasons in Melbourne. Anywhere around the world, everyone thinks the 1880s May Day in Chicago. No. 1856 it happened, although we May the 1st is the celebration of that 8-hour day. But out of that, and some of those people that organised around that were for Eureka or in those earlier rebellions through the goldfields as well, part of that movement. And from that, people like Monty was there at the front line in the Eureka stockade. He was some of my first front-end accounts of what happened. After that, he actually got away, and he also started his organisation around the early labour movement, or union movement at the time. He was very heavily involved in the 1880s around the first social democratic foundations, which were planting around the world. And myself and Dusk, when we studied this, it was around the time of the birth of the Second International, of the late 1889. And so it happened here as well. There was a lot of early formations of trade unions forming the parties, etc. They weren't revolutionary parties by any means to topple capitalism, no, but to get concessions out of the system, yes. It was still a vitally important step forward, which culminated in the prop of the Australian Labor Party in 1901 when it formed when we federated to become a nation after that. But he played a very heavily involved in that as well, and he was very heavily involved in the industrial workers of the world in the early 1900s. So he was quite elderly by then, and very heavily involved in the anti-conscription movement of World War I. He was arrested twice, jailed twice during that period for sedition. And this is a man who, as I said, he passed away in 1920 at the years of 88. So right up to his dying days, he was very active in the labour movement. And we should take our hats off and learn from some of these lessons he went through as well, and the inspirational stuff. So we don't have, in Australia, we don't have to look very far. We do have our revolutionaries here. And what was unique about the rebellion as well, we did have revolutionaries as well from all over Europe. And so there was, we did that talk on the Red Ribbon Rebellion, you had a mixed mash of everyone. You had Irish rebels, all those who were originally deported from Ireland, like the convicts they had been forced out. They were fighting for, and quite rightly so, justly, for an independent Ireland away from British colonialism and British imperialism. You had the English Chartists as well, and their early times were quite revolutionary as well. And some of the demands were quite revolutionary. So they experienced there. You had German revolutionaries as well. A lot of Germans fled Germany after the wars of 1840s there. A lot of them would have fought alongside Marx and Engels as well. A lot of them came here to Australia. People think they all settled in South Australia, or majority of them around Handorf and that, and set up vineyards and etc. Perhaps so, but a lot of them came to the goldfields, and a lot of them were involved in the early work of these rebellions, etc. You had Italian revolutionaries. We had French revolutionaries as well, interesting enough. They came in with it. So we had a vast array of experience. We even had Americans came here as well, and there was one that was very heavily involved in Eureka, Captain Ross, and which actually he helped organise some of the military training for those early diggers as well. So there was a vast world of wealth here by the time. With the early Chinese, there was and there was some anti-Chinese sentiment, unfortunately, at that time, only amongst a section of diggers, not all of them. But a lot of those early Chinese were led to believe because they actually fought the British in the Opium Wars in the 1840s, and they came here as well to seek their fortune. So if there was actually unity, along with the Indigenous, it would have been one hell of an army, and would have been some interesting outcomes on that as well. But what's it actually appeal? What's it relevant now for us? Well, this is where history is beautiful. It teaches us a powerful lesson to learn from what we can do when moving forward as well. Okay, we're not going to replicate Eureka again. That's not going to happen. And obviously, there's different material conditions we're doing now. And what we had to get back to is that basic form of organisation, education, agitation moving forward. Like, I'm just going to keep advocating that right through when I do all these videos, and get back to it. Get out of the movement, let's get into the masses and talk to ordinary working class people about their everyday issues. And I know it might sound boring, it might sound completely hopeless and frustrating at times. I understand that, I get that. Look, I'm an organiser, I talk to workers every day. And sometimes I come across a wide range of views, many things, some I totally disagree with as well. But we've got to start somewhere. And obviously, I like to actually build on what Caleb's actually set out, is building a community of us, not setting out doing another party. I'm not interested. We've got probably about 4 parties here in Australia. Not interested, and I'm not interested in getting into a discussion about that either, about putting anyone down, because there's actually some good comrades in all those parties that are trying to do some good work there, and I'm not going to undermine that either. So I'm not interested. Let's concentrate on building this community. And look, regardless if you're a member of any particular Communist Party, or you might be a member of the Labor Party as well, okay, but the door's open. Come into a broader community as well. It's not about egos. I don't want that. It's not about me or anyone else. It's about us as a collective moving forward. And I think I'm more at the moment. I'd love to go to the CPI. Hopefully, Caleb set up, but we'll have to have a look about international travel at the time. If travel restrictions might have been left at the moment, I don't think we've got international travel leaving from eastern states at the moment of Australia. So we're stuck for the time being, but not to say there's going to be a lot more of it. I believe he wants to set a lot more up. So that's something I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of the comrades in the US as well. And vitally important as well, what we're doing as well. And I like this old saying, it actually started with an old communist. The environment movement adopted it many years ago, is think globally, act locally. And there was someone in the old CPA originally came up, that's a form of international. And what we're doing is acting locally. We know what we're doing. We're not alone. This is a whole international thing against imperialism and capitalism. And what we're seeing now, the reason why it's important, we also need to do this. The Australian working class here, the working class everywhere, is under attack, big time now. There's no going back. There's no turning back or hoping it'll just be like a temporary thing or we'll batten down the hatches. No, we are under attack. The Morrison government, which I only found out during the week, I haven't actually read the whole thing. I need to have a little detail to believe there's legislation being written up to actually give every Australian worker a pay freeze for at least about 2 to 3 years, so-called to get the economy going. I don't know how that's going to work when you give everyone a pay freeze and they're not able to buy anything because the prices are still going up and they think they're going to get the economy going. But the idea was to pay freeze, so to help business. Businesses are not the ones who get an economy going. It's the working class. Always keep that in mind. Bourgeois economists like to say differently, and politicians as well. But just remember, like I said in the last video, bourgeois economists are the modern day witch doctors who practice alchemy. That's what they do. See you, Helen. I'll talk to you later. So that's what we want to understand as well, because workers are the ones who buy things. They're the majority of them. They're the major consumer. How are they going to afford anything when they can't buy anything? So all they're doing is actually making the crisis worse. But it's important we need to get organised and talk to people. Look, this is on the hand. This is on the cards here. As God knows what else is they're drafting up as well. There's some pretty draconian stuff they would like to get through Parliament, and they're using the COVID-19 situation as an opportunity to try and ram through a lot of nasty legislation as well. Now, on that, and this is where on that as well, I just want to actually, furthermore, the attacks on the Victorian state government is intensifying. Now, I'm not a fan of the Labor Party. I'm not a member of the Labor Party, but I'm certainly got my criticisms of it. But the Andrews government's done some good things for us as well. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, through his government, we've got labour hire licensing. We've got industrial manslaughter bills. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, an employer can now be face court and go to jail if someone's killed on the job, be it on a construction site, factory, etc. Workers killed on the job, make them more responsible. Now, obviously, that was a big no-no. Capitalists don't like that. So they're using every excusable means to try and get rid of it. That's the underlying thing. Some of this pro-worker legislation, and it should be supported, regardless if it's a social democratic party or whatever. Then if there's legislation that advances the workers or totally helps the workers, of course we would support that. But this is some of the underlying currents that's happening. Also, too, the Andrews government is the only Australian state government that signed on to the One Belt, One Road initiative by China. Now, we can all see that idiot Prime Minister Morrison, as soon as Trump wanted to attack China, Morrison's on the bandwagon. He got his orders from Washington to do so. And obviously under the guise, they're trying to find robust legislation to overdo what Andrews did. Now, this One Belt, One Road initiative is probably a major misunderstanding. It's not about what jobs going offshore. It has nothing to do with that at all. It's actually about building up our economy. Again, win-win situation with China. He saw the advantage of it when he was in China and what they were trying to achieve. Obviously, unfortunately, as I said, we're part of that whole US military complex, etc., and part of that whole US market, and we've been given our orders from Wall Street and Washington to do away with it. So you can see what's happening here. It's not the first time that's ever happened. It's been undermined. We had the Whitlam government, the CIA back coup against him. We had under also John Curtin when he was our World War II Prime Minister. He wanted to actually have Australia set its own course, and he was told, you do that, there's going to be major trade sanctions against you. So it's not the first time. So that struggle is vitally important. But let's start with the basics and let's get the organisation back on the ground again. Obviously, that's a lot of work to do. It's going to be not easy. It's going to be hard. And as Lennon said, the road of struggle is a long and tedious one as well. But it's not hard. It's not hard once you get on. It wants to start moving on with it. You only can develop and get better and better. If you make mistakes, make mistakes. Don't kick yourself because you did. Learn from them as well. Well, look, I want to run this up for today. It's probably got another 10 minutes as well, and before I finish up. But it's been a pleasure talking to you as well. Obviously, we are certainly now in a time and era where the attacks on the working classes is further intensifying around the world. US imperialism is declining. It's on the way out, and what you see when things are coming into being and things are coming out of is going out of being. Such as imperialism itself. It's becoming more reactionary, it's becoming more decadent, or nasty. It's just everything is just bad, and this gets worse, if you want to put it that way. And we're seeing this as well. Obviously, all the comrades in the US, you've got you've got a lot of work up ahead of you. Yes, you certainly want to see the election out of the way, and it's not really looking good either. You got basically it's coming down to a choice between a complete and utter whack job or a complete total airhead. And their main interests are not to advance working class interests of the war, but to advance whatever sections of the ruling class they represent. Interesting, I watched, just before we finish up, I watched an interesting movie on Netflix last night called Vice. Yep, a movie called Vice. It's actually about Dick Cheney. And it goes right up through to the George W. Bush years, right up to the start of Obama, President Obama, and just about, especially around the time of 9/11, and you could see the infights within the government at the time. You had Colin Powell on one side representing the CIA, you had Rumsfeld on the other representing the Pentagon or the military. Rumsfeld wanted war. Colin Powell didn't. He says Iraq does not have weapons of mass destruction. We have all the CIA intelligence, etc., etc. So you can see the weapons manufacturers and the intelligence there fighting. And these two sections of the ruling class wanted to fight. One wanted war, one didn't. One wanted instability, another didn't. So, and Caleb actually talks a lot about that as well. But it's a very interesting one. Watch it. At the end, the character or the actor who plays Cheney gives a speech why he went in 9/11, at the end they're trying to justify why he went to war in Iraq, etc. And it's war on terrorism. Well, it hasn't been a war on terrorism at all. In fact, it's been a war on the world's people, and that's what it's come down to. It's no, you and I and everyone else never ever wants benefit from this, and this is what we've got to start now doing. This is what's vitally, crucially important. We get back to the basics and start organising on the ground up again. We're not going to wait for the next, Lennon to come along or whoever, or the next Mao or whatever come along and try and organise us. We've got to do it ourselves, and we've got to learn from those experiences as well. We've got a lot of rich history about it in Australia. We do have a rich history. We're just going to look at it. And we'll realise what we're doing is a continuation of what those comrades back in the 1850s did as well. And obviously, it's certainly not over yet. And I wanted to add that off. Last week too, I do apologise. I stopped up right at the end of reading White Communism, and I said no, it's not communism we live under; it's capitalism. So it's just a little mistake. But hey, I make mistakes, and everyone else. I just wanted to continue it on so I can wind this up. As it continues on, after I've left at the last, after the last question, take another example. You are a tenant. For 10 or 15 or 20 years, you have been living in a house. You have paid your rent regularly. You have paid off your flat several times over. Your landlord smiled at you as long as you were a good tenant. But now you have lost your job. You have not paid your rent for several months. A sheriff comes. Your furniture is thrown out on the sidewalk. You are evicted. Yet you know perfectly well that there isn't a landlord who built the house. It is you and others like you who have produced all the building material and who have actually constructed the house. Besides, you made the landlord rich by a payment of rents. Suppose now you refuse to quit the House. Suppose you band together with your fellow tenants and declare you are not going to permit anybody to drive you out in the street. You are a proud American, or in our case, Australian. You will not allow anybody to turn you into a beggar. Again, you would be confronted with police, clubs, courts, and jail. It looks strange, but this madness is the everyday practice of our great and wealthy country. And that's the same thing here in Australia as well. Those written off from America, same thing. Working class people are getting kicked out of their homes. They're not just able to pay the rent, they're not able to pay their mortgage off. They are foreclosing big time. We're not immune to it, just like anyone else. And look, to the ones in Australia, we have a lot of work to do in the meantime of organisation. And once again, I highly recommend getting this book as well from, I think it's Moise Olgin. I think I've got the name right. I recommend, very simple read. And once again, I still recommend this book. I'm going to bore people senseless by saying this. William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals. If you want to read about matter in motion, dialectical and historical materialism, an introduction to Marxism, nice thick book, but easy read. Yeah, I would highly recommend that as well. Look, comrades, I'm going to wind this up now, and friends and fellow workers. Obviously, we've obviously got a big fight ahead. I'm going to try and keep doing these at least once a weekend. I'd like to keep it around about now, give it take a few minutes, like I said at the start, and obviously keep you interested. I believe Caleb might be doing another live chat this weekend, and I believe Comrade Dust will be doing his regular Saturday night one as well. So tune in and like his pages as well. And anyone else, I would strongly advise start doing things like these as well. Let's start in this communication about, let's build up a world economy. Our country is the earth, our country the world. Let's start thinking international. So let's act locally and think globally. Comrades, it's been a pleasure. And once again, I'll see you probably no doubt next Saturday. Dare to struggle, dare to win. If you don't fight, you'll lose. All the best.